Well, good morning. Before I start, I just want to thank people here, this fellowship, people in this fellowship, for making me and Liz so welcome here. Some people will know, and we've told our story to them kind of privately, how much we needed a fellowship like this with our experiences before. So I just thank you for that. Particularly thank you, Jamie, for your support, and particularly for trusting me with the pulpit this morning. I don't take any of this stuff lightly, and I know what it is to trust somebody to deliver the word. So thank you for that. And we'll kick off. There are various words, I think, that are used to describe the Christian journey. I think some are more helpful than others. Are we taking an echo down there a bit, Vicky? That's brilliant. Some are more helpful than others, but I think, can we put the thing up there ready for that? Okay. It's this one, a work in progress. I quite like that. That works for me, because we've all probably been past a building site and seen that there's a lot of activity, but nothing seems to be appearing above ground level. But we know that if the job's being done right, that there are things going on that are necessary for the construction of that building. There are pipes going in, there are trenches being dug, there's concrete being poured in. The foundations are being put in that's necessary for the building to grow. And that's pretty similar to our journey, I think. That sometimes we can look at ourselves and think, I don't think that I'm changing. Early on in our journey, we think that, we're making progress day by day, but sometimes we feel that we're just kind of going through the motions, and we're not seeing that growth in us. But if we're doing the right thing, if we're studying, we're reading the Bible, we're praying, we're coming to church, we're doing the right thing, making the right choices, we know that the foundations are being laid in our lives, and sometimes God will open a door, give us an opportunity, drop a word from our head to our heart, and that lifts us up to the next level, and it's important. So I quite like that, as long as it's not being used as an excuse, as long as it's not being used to pretend that people are progressing when, in fact, there's no construction going on at all, or the demolition firms have moved in. As long as that's not happening, that works for me. Another thing I like doing is, separate from that, is talking about people. I think it's the old English teacher in me, to be honest. I like to talk about people in the Bible because I like to kind of bring them down out of the pages and bring them down to make them real, because we can learn from their journey. So it's a particular privilege to talk not just about an individual, but about a whole family. A family you'll have heard of, the Bethany family. Living in a little village called Bethany just outside Jerusalem. We have an elder sister called Martha, a younger sister called Mary, and a brother called Lazarus. But what I want to do is to combine the two. I want to look at them in terms of them being works in progress. And in order to look at that, what we've got to do is go back to the earliest picture of the building. And that comes in Luke chapter 10, which is where we're going to start here. I'm going to put the scripture up there because I work better that way. This is Luke chapter 10, verses 38 to 42. And it says this. This is the NIV version up there, by the way. As Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. She had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. She came to him and asked, "Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself? Tell her to help me." "Martha, Martha," the Lord answered, "you are worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed, or indeed only one. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her." Now, if you've been around church for a while, you will have heard this preached on a number of times. I have over the years. And every time I've heard this one, the take on it has been the same. People see this as about two types of people you get in the church, two different ways of doing the Christian journey. You get people like Martha, who are into doing things. It's all got to be active. Time is short, they reason, so you've got to be doing stuff. Whilst there are people like Mary, who think it's more to do with kind of studying, taking stuff in and learning things. In a sense, a choice between the practical and the spiritual. And here's Jesus on this occasion apparently siding with the spiritual. Now, I've got to be honest with you that I had a problem with that. Because before I became a Christian, that's exactly how I used to see Christians. Christians were spiritual, and it used to put me right off. The church I saw as a kind of irrelevance out there. It wasn't really connected with the real world. And the Christians I'd met all seemed to float about somehow, not connecting with reality. They seemed to be preaching this message that you've got to love one another, you've got to be nice to one another, bless you, floated about saying, oh, slap me so I could forgive you. You know, it didn't seem connected with the real world. I couldn't identify with them. My legs dropped off, praise the Lord anyway. You know, I thought, this doesn't sound right. That, you know, the spiritual doesn't kind of cut it. It used to put me right off. And here's Jesus apparently saying that the spiritual is a better choice. But the more that I look at this, the more I realize that's not right. This is not what this is about. See, I think Martha has a rough deal in this. She is always characterized as the bad girl. Mary's the good girl. Martha's the one who's made the bad choice. If you see any film versions of this, you'll always find that Martha is portrayed as some crabby spinster. She's got her hair pulled back into a tight bun. She struts around like a Jack Russell, snapping at people. You know, she's like a younger version of Nora Batty. Whilst Mary is glamorous. She's got long brown hair and beautiful blue eyes. I mean, she's gorgeous. I mean, she'll be walking around Bethany on the arm of the local Brad Pitt, and the best that poor old Martha can hope for is compo. So I kind of thought, you know, this is not entirely fair. Because after all, what if Martha had done what Jesus said? Sat at his feet. Well, that's great. She gets to hear his teaching, but then nobody gets fed. I bet the super spiritual were pretty pleased she stopped in the kitchen. I bet they didn't turn their noses up at the food she prepared. And what about Mary? Couldn't she have just shifted herself and gone into the kitchen for a little bit, just to lend a bit of a hand? It would have, you know, shared the load a bit. No, the more that I look at this, the more that I think that this is not about position at all. It's not about being at Jesus' feet or being in the kitchen, the spiritual or the practical. It's not about choice of position at all. It's about attitude to that position. Here's the problem. You've got two sisters. Jesus is in their house, but only one of them's happy about it. There's the problem. For Martha, having Jesus in her house was causing her stress and a problem. And that's what Jesus addresses here. He simply says, Martha, you're worried and upset about many things. It's like it's part of your nature, Martha, just to fret and to worry and to stress. And that is coming between you and the relationship with me. And that's all he does. He challenges her, points it out, points her in the right direction. And we can understand that, can't we? Because there are plenty of people like Martha in the church. They not only do things, but they take on so much because they feel they have to, that they then start to complain about it. And it's a small step from having a Martha complex to having a martyr complex, where you feel all the work that you do is kind of, you're becoming a victim of it all. Nobody helps us. It's not fair. And the truth of the matter is, if the work of the Lord is a pressure to you, tell you what, stop doing it. I mean, more reasonably, go to Jesus, go to God and say, can you change my attitude? But the work of the Lord was never intended to be a stress. And that's what Jesus points out here. I mean, the truth of the matter is, there's always been more Marys in the church than Marthas. It's been the way. Prior to this episode in Luke 10 here, these scriptures we got up on the screen, Jesus has been talking about that very thing. The harvest is plentiful, the laborers are few. When I first became a Christian, I was told that you'll find that, generally speaking, more than 90% of the work done in any church is done by less than 10% of the people. That's what I was told. And whilst it would be nice if the Marys got into the kitchen a bit more often, if they don't, well, the Marthas just get on with it. Because if God's in it, it will get done. But it was never intended to be a stress and a pressure. And that's what Jesus picks up on here. Just shapes Martha and points her in the right direction. That's all that's really going on. So both girls get some teaching in this episode. Mary picks up something at Jesus' feet here, whatever he was talking on. Martha rather gets challenged. But the important thing to do, or I want to look at him as works in progress, is that it's no good just being challenged. It's what you do with that challenge that matters. We've had plenty of guys that we sort of met in prison who have said, yeah, thank you for that, that really challenged me. But when you look back on their lives, on the next months of their lives, you say, but it didn't challenge you enough to change anything, did it? So how do these challenges that these girls get change them. And in order to do that, we need to look ahead, don't we? We need to look at John chapter 11. There's a story that everybody is familiar with, I guess. The two sisters have a brother called Lazarus. He gets sick. They send for Jesus. They assume that Jesus is going to come and heal him. But Jesus delays. Jesus deliberately delays because he knows that Lazarus is going to die, and he knows that he's going to raise him from the dead. He says to his disciples that Lazarus has fallen asleep, but this will not end in death. So by the time that Jesus arrives at Bethany, Lazarus has been dead and buried for 4 days. Now those 4 days are important, because we're talking about a time when kind of medical knowledge was probably a bit flimsy anyway, and it wasn't unheard of for people to be declared dead and then to find that they were in fact in a comatose or unconscious condition and then to recover. So the body was sometimes checked the next day. If you hadn't moved after 24 hours, you were reckoned the diagnosis was correct, you were dead. If you hadn't moved after 2 days, you were seriously dead. And if after 3 days, that was it, the line was drawn, you were now beyond official hope. So Jesus waits 4. Because Jesus knows that what he's going to do is to throw a bombshell into the religious world. He knows he's going to raise from the dead Lazarus in front of a whole horde of people, because the Bethany family were well known, well respected. And he knows he's going to raise Lazarus publicly, close to Jerusalem. And Lazarus is a man who's been dead 4 days, whose body is starting to decompose. Nobody has done this. To raise a man whose body was starting to decompose is going to send shockwaves out into the religious world. It will be a clear statement of who Jesus is. And that's in fact exactly how it turned out, wasn't it? When Lazarus is raised from the dead, the religious leaders plotted to kill Jesus even more. Even Lazarus became a target because his very existence spoke of who Jesus was. They couldn't cope with it. In other words, by arriving 4 days late, Jesus knows exactly what he's doing. The problem is that Martha and Mary don't. And isn't that the way of our journey a lot of the time? Most of the time, in fact. We assume that God knows what he's doing, but the fact is that we don't get it. We don't understand it. We don't get the bigger picture. Why is this happening to me? Why is this happening to these good people over here? Why are these bad guys getting away with it? Why is our church not doing this? Why is this happening to us? We don't get it. We assume that God knows what he's doing. We just wish he'd let us in on the picture sometimes. But in reality, I guess, it's at times like that where you get a kind of better picture of the sort of building that's being constructed in our world, really. So how are our two works in progress faring at this time? Well, what about Martha? It says this, when Martha first heard that Jesus was coming, we're in John 11, chapter 20, verse 20. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Now, at first sight, we could look at this and say, typical Martha. This is Nora Batty on the warpath. If you'd been here, this wouldn't have happened. If you'd done what we told you to do, if you cared like you said you did, this wouldn't have happened, Jesus. Here she is, playing the blame game again. It's your fault. It's not fair. See, Martha, you haven't listened to any of this challenge at all. You haven't changed one little bit. You're just the same. Until we see what she says in the next breath. The next verse, but I know that even now, God will give you whatever you ask. And that stops us, doesn't it? Because we look at it and we say, wait a minute, as a statement of faith, that's pretty much full on. Even now, God will give you what you ask for. Well, hang on, Martha, what do you seriously think that Jesus can do about this now, eh? What do you seriously think? Your brother's been dead and buried 4 days. What are you thinking that Jesus can do now? And if you'd asked Martha that question, I guess she would have looked and said, well, I don't know, but something. And that's so important. I hope you get that. That's so important. That even in this situation that in Martha's eyes has gone beyond hope, and in fact it's gone beyond hope, Jesus still represents her only hope. And when that penny drops into our world, it changes so much. That here is somebody who makes hope in hopeless situations, who makes a way when there is no way. And when we understand that, we understand what Peter said back in John chapter 6, when people were deserting Jesus, saying the teaching is too hard. And when Jesus said to them, the core 12, are you going to leave me as well? Peter says, where would we go? Who would we go to? And when that penny drops and we understand what Jesus has teased out of Martha at this point, to find out what's going on beneath her character, if you're going to turn your back on Jesus, where are you going to go? And when you realize that, you have to hang in there, because having Jesus in your life means there is never, ever a situation that is beyond hope. Doesn't mean that Jesus is going to step in and sort everything out in the way we want, but there is no such thing as a hopeless situation. Now, Jesus sees that in Martha and takes the opportunity, seeing that foundation in place, to raise her to a new level. So they have a conversation about the resurrection in the next couple of verses. He says, well, do you not believe your brother's going to rise from the dead? And Martha says, well, yeah, in the last days, yep. But Jesus then throws into her world an amazing statement and question. Verse 25 and 26. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? There are lots of questions that people talk about as being the deep questions of life. But I tell you what, nobody will ever ask you, could ever ask you a deeper question than that one. I'm the resurrection and the life. Do you believe me? If you believe in me, you will never die. Do you believe this? Because how people answer that question determines the whole shape of eternity for them. So Jesus asked you that question this morning, doesn't he? Really, in your heart, do you believe this? Whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Well, do you believe this? It's a brilliant question, a challenging question. But also, Jesus, what a time to ask Martha that question. Come on, what a time. I mean, the girl probably hasn't slept for a week, hasn't eaten for a week. She's watched her brother get sicker and sicker. She's been praying that Jesus is going to turn up. She hears a noise outside the house and thinks, is that him? Has he finally got here? And people say, no, Martha, nobody's heard anything from him. It's not him. She has her hopes raised and dashed. Finally, Lazarus dies. They lay him in the tomb, and she's overwhelmed with grief. Bit by bit, that grief converts to kind of frustration and anger, and finally Jesus saunters in, and she storms after him and says, demands answers. What's going on here? I thought you cared. And within moments, the person who she feels must have let her down so badly turns to her and says, do you believe in me? What a time to ask that question. Jesus, you've now picked your moments. What a time to ask that question of Martha. But actually, when you think about it, what better time could there possibly be to ask each one of us that question, to get a really honest answer? See, it's dead easy to answer that question, isn't it? When you're experiencing a whole range of blue sky days, everything's kind of floating in your life, it's brilliant, God's all over, your activity, your relationships are great, you're feeling good about yourself. Dead easy to answer the question then, isn't it? Do you believe in me? Of course I do, Jesus. Of course I do. I'm on fire for you, Lord. Bit tougher when the cold wind blows, though, isn't it? It's a bit tougher when the icy wind starts coming in and the cold steel rain starts falling in your world. A bit tougher then when the redundancy notice hits the carpet and you're facing financial ruin, you're in danger of losing your house. A bit tougher then. Or the relationship you've pinned all your emotional hopes on falls apart. A bit tougher. When you're hurt, when you're broken, when the doctor looks across the desk and says, well, I'm sorry, I've got bad news. A bit tougher then, isn't it? Particularly when Jesus pops up next to him and says, well, now, do you believe me? Do you believe in me? A bit harder then. So how does our work in progress, how does Martha answer that question now then? We'd understand it, wouldn't we, if she said, I don't, because plenty of people answer it that way. No, I don't. When the circumstances of their life fail to match up to their hopes and their dreams, they walk. We've heard it. We've seen it happen. People walk, sometimes for a season, don't they? They go away for a couple of months and then they come back and they say, I had a few problems, but I'm sorted out now, so now I'm back. And you want to slap them. Because you think, you idiot, at the very time when you needed to be pulling closer into the center, you walk and try to deal with it in your own strength. Some people walk and they never come back. So how does our work in progress? How does Martha respond to that one, eh? If she'd said, I'm walking away, we'd have understood it. If she'd said, just give me time, Jesus, I'm trying to process it, we'd have hugged her and said, brilliant answer. What she in fact says is this: yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who is to come into the world. Come on. I am sorry, Martha. I have totally and utterly misjudged you. I never saw that coming. See, the last person that said anything like that, back in Matthew 16, wasn't it? Peter, Jesus is the disciples, they're discussing who Jesus is, and Jesus cuts across and says, yeah, but who do you say I am? And it's Simon Peter who pipes up and says, yeah, you are the Christ, you are the Son of the living God. And Jesus is amazed by that answer. He says, you could not have got that out of your own head. That could not have come to you through man's teaching. This has come to you as a direct revelation from my Father in heaven. And he renames him on the spot. He says, from this moment on, you will no longer be called Simon. The name means a reed, something blown about in the wind from this way and that, by the wind of circumstances. From this moment on, you'll be something more solid. You'll be Peter, and Peter means a rock. And on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. Now, the Catholics have tried to hijack that a bit and suggest that the rock was Peter himself and that Jesus was building the church on Peter, making him the first pope. But we know that's not right. The rock is that direct revelation from heaven about who Jesus is. And there's Peter standing on that rock. And now here's Martha in the storm of circumstances in her life, standing on that same rock. See, it's amazing. She's gone to Jesus. And I want to make Martha real to you here, because people need to recognize that they are they've been through situations like Martha's. She's gone to Jesus, torn apart and confused. She stood in front of him and said, Jesus, I thought you cared. Part of me is so angry that I just want to throw myself at you and beat my fists against your chest because I don't get it anymore. But another part of me just wants to throw myself into your arms and say, help me, because no one else can. Jesus, I am hurt, I am lost, I am lonely, I am confused, I'm broken. I don't like what's happening to me. Please don't ask me to praise you in all circumstances, because I'm not getting it at this moment. I'm broken and I'm lost. I've got more questions than answers, but even now I put my trust in you. I cling to you by my fingertips because you are God Almighty. In the midst of that storm, dear Martha stands on that rock, and now not even the gates of hell can prevail against her. And if you're standing on that rock this morning, the good news is the gates of hell can't prevail against you either. And how does that make you feel? Well, it should change everything. It should change everything. I have just judged you, Martha, but what about our super spiritual sister, eh? What about Mary? Well, we saw back in verse 20 that Mary's not coming out. She's stopping at home. She's doing something the Jews called Shiva, Hebrew for 7. It's the 7 traditional days of mourning that the bereaved family would go through, where they would sit in their own home, traditionally on a low stool, barefoot, and people would come to them, professional mourners who were paid to weep, and the family and the friends. They would all come and comfort them. See, Mary, in a sense here, is taking refuge, taking her comfort from people, from ritual and tradition. And it's easily done, that. Because Christians are nice people. They will come into your world and help you. But sometimes it's possible to switch our focus and have people come into our world to tell us what we want to hear, to make us feel that we were badly treated. She takes her comfort from people and tradition. Jesus has to send for her. And to her credit, she goes. But notice what it says in verse 30. Now Jesus had not yet entered the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. See, Jesus doesn't take one step towards Mary. She is called to him, and it's to her credit that she does. Martha needed no such call. She just rushed out with a broken heart, with honesty, with questions, and dumped them on Jesus, and Jesus takes that opportunity to raise her to another level. Mary has to be sent for. But Jesus has not taken a step towards her. Jesus doesn't attend pity parties, neither does he fit in neatly into ritual and tradition. The rock doesn't move. Martha runs to it. Mary's summoned to it, where she collapses at his feet and says this. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. See, it's quite traditional to put Martha as the cold-hearted, logical one, and Mary as the sensitive, caring one. That's not true. Both sisters feel exactly the same level of grief, I think. They both say exactly the same words. It's just they deal with it differently, but that's the nature of a work in progress. Same situation, different reaction. Beware of people who try to box off your Christian faith and say this is what it should look like. This is how you should react to this situation. They're missing the point that the Christian journey is beautiful because it's personal and it's individual. God knows every single thing about you and knows exactly what you need at this moment in your life in order to lead you to another level, whether it's a foundation that's being laid or another level of the building. Martha's moved on tons, hasn't she? Mary's still got some work to do. She collapses at his feet, but that's often the way with the super spiritual when it's all head knowledge. I mean, Bill Wilson, in his take on the Mary Martha story, talks about an occasion when a big sex scandal erupted in the Christian world involving a big-name TV evangelist called Jimmy Swaggart. And he remembers how it rocked people's faith, and some of these Bible students just walked out of college, dumped their Bibles in the trash cans and left. They couldn't cope with it. Or they could have written you great essays on the functions of the Holy Spirit, the use of the semicolon in Ezekiel. Oh, you could have done all that stuff. But when it came to the crunch, they found that they were not standing on a rock. They were standing on the shifting sands of theology, and their ivory towers just crumbled around them. And so it was with a Victorian novelist called Thomas Hardy. He wrote sweeping love stories. It's set in the Dorset countryside, like Far From the Madding Crowd. He had a faith. He was studying to be a minister. But then jobs never came his way. Relationships fell apart. And right in the midst of it, Darwin published his Origin of the Species. And the theory of evolution destroyed him. He could not cope with it. And in later years, he wrote dark, bitter, twisted novels like Tess of the D'Urbervilles, where God is portrayed as a sinister puppet master, playing with people's emotions, leading good people on, and then pulling the rug out from under their feet. I guess Hardy must have felt like Martha and Mary did when Lazarus died. That God hadn't turned up for him. And that meant he didn't love him. And he couldn't cope with it. And he walked. Fortunately, Mary and Martha don't walk. They hang in there. So they're there when Lazarus is raised from the dead, when their brother comes out of the tomb. But what would be good if we're looking at works in progress is say, where do they finish up? Do we get a picture of the building later on? And of course we do. In the next chapter of John. And we'll head to a conclusion with this. First 3 verses of John chapter 12 say this. 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany where Lazarus lived, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. Here a dinner was given in Jesus' honor. Martha served while Lazarus was among those reclining at the table with him. Then Mary took about a pint of pure nard, an expensive perfume. She poured it on Jesus' feet and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. We're in the last week before the crucifixion. Another meal in Jesus' honor. Lazarus is there this time, and so are the sisters. And where are they? Well, surprise, surprise. Martha's in the kitchen. Mary's at Jesus' feet. No change in position at all, but a whole heap of change in attitude. Martha this time serves. No hint of complaint. And Mary doesn't just take in, she now gives out and anoints Jesus in a gesture that she won't understand the beauty of yet. But there's something more to this that I want people to grasp. Something more to it than this picture. Most people will have an idea of what the three most important things that Jesus said were. You'll have your own list, but I reckon if you've got a list, these three will come pretty high up on your list. When asked what the most important commandment is, Matthew 22:37, Jesus says this: love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. He then goes on to say that the next commandment is the same: love your neighbor as yourself. Just before ascending to heaven, he gives his disciples this instruction: but you will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes on you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and in Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth. Acts 1, verse 8. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul. Love neighbor as yourself, and let your lives be a reflection of the glory of God. Now, if we are works in progress, folks, doesn't that give us a pretty good picture of what the finished building's looking like? Isn't that what we're aiming for? Isn't that what we're pushing towards? A people who love God with all their heart and soul. A people who love their neighbor as themselves. A people whose lives and whose day-to-day business reflects the glory of God. That's where we're headed. That is our finished product. Now, thinking of that, if that's right, if you agree with that, just think back to that picture at Bethany again. What have we got? Well, we've got Lazarus. People were coming to a faith in Lazarus simply because Lazarus was dead and now he's alive. That his very life bore witness to the glory of God. And isn't that true of every single one of us here who's a Christian? If you're a Christian here, wasn't there a time when you were dead and now you're alive? Doesn't that now give us an opportunity to live our lives to the glory of God as witnesses to his glory? It's Lazarus. Where's Martha? Well, Martha is serving people. It was her gift, now it's her joy. It's what she was created for. It's a ministry, if you like, loving her neighbor as herself. And Mary? Well, Mary is loving the Lord her God with all her heart and soul. Not just taking in, but pouring out, emptying out onto Jesus the most expensive things you could probably lay hands on. Pouring it out. One sister loving God with all her heart and soul. One sister loving her neighbor as herself, and a brother whose life is reflecting the glory of God. Can you see that picture of harmony we've got at Bethany? And remember that this family, not so long ago, was dysfunctional. A brother sick to death, a sister burdened down by the problems and expectations of others, and another sister just kind of taking out and taking a refuge in the attitudes of people. They have been led on a journey from dysfunction to harmony, and that's the journey that you and I are on. From dysfunction to harmony. From chaos to order. From death to life. From hopelessness to hope. And right at the center of every step of the way has been Jesus. Directing, challenging, focusing, loving, pouring in supernaturally if necessary. It's the journey that we are all on. And if you allow Jesus to be at the center of that journey, at every step of the way, that's the journey that we're on. And we don't have to choose. There's the beauty that we come to a close on here. There's the beauty. We don't have to choose, because I want the same spirit that's in Lazarus. I want my life to be a witness to the glory of God. I want people to see Jesus in me. The trouble is I let him down so often. I make a complete mess of it. But as long as I pick myself up and I push on in that direction with Jesus at the center, I can possibly get there, closer to that. But I also want the same spirit that's in Martha. I want to serve people. I want people to feel that I have been a benefit in their lives. It's why we go into prison, I guess. I mess it up because I'm not a great example too much of the time, but I'm trying. But I also want to love God with all my heart and soul. I'm not very good at that, folks. I'm not very good at that. At love. Been brought up in a way that pushes relationship at a distance. But God is breaking that down, mainly through what we're doing in prison. Breaking that down so I can push on. I'm not there yet, nowhere near, never will be. But I'm pressing on that journey. The next step that Jesus makes, of course, is a journey a few miles up the road to a cross. So the question is, what's the next step of our journey? And I want to leave it with this, I think. I want to issue a challenge to people this morning. I want you to take a step back from your life. It's people who know the 12-step program will know it as a step 4, where you take a fearless inventory, moral inventory of your life. But take a step back and look at the building that's being constructed in your life in Christian terms. What's it looking like? How's it progressing? And once you've taken an honest look at that, ask yourself, is there anything that I need to do now? Am I a bit like Martha? Is there issues in my life that I need to deal with that's getting between me and Jesus? In which case, let Jesus guide you today and bring you to a new place. Or perhaps it's like Mary, you think that, hang on, I'm doing a little bit too much of the taking in, I'm not doing enough of the giving out. Perhaps I need to shift my focus a bit. In which case, let Jesus call you. Or perhaps it's even like Lazarus. There's something that's keeping you dead in a tomb, a sin or something. Perhaps you don't know Jesus at all. Well, now's the time to let Jesus act supernaturally in your life and call you. Whatever it is, folks, please don't leave church today without doing business with the Master Builder. Let him to shape you. Let him to lay foundations. Let to raise him to another level. I'm the resurrection and the life. Do you believe this? Because if you do, and you stand on that rock, then the gates of hell can't prevail against you. In which case, run to the rock this morning, like Martha. Be summoned to it like Mary. Respond to the call like Lazarus. And then the gates of hell, church, cannot prevail against you in the storms of life. I'm going to leave it there. Thank you, folks, for listening. God bless you all.